One of the hardest things about living in Dublin is rent, or more specifically, the rent increases. For example, we used to live in a flat with 29 square meters, tiny studio apartment, and when we moved in, the rent was €1,550 per month. Now, that is already way too much for a tiny studio apartment to begin with, but aside from that, within just a few years, the rent increased from €1,550 to €1,743 per month. That's a huge increase, that's almost €250. So why? Hi, I'm Dublin, and today I want to talk to you about rent increases, why they're horrible, and what is actually getting better. On this channel we do videos about what it's like living in Ireland as expats, so make sure to like the video, subscribe and turn on the notification bell to see more videos like this. And also check out our backlog. We have a huge amount of videos already there about what it's like to live, and especially related to accommodation in Ireland. So to go back to our example from the start, how can rent within just a few years increase from €1,550 to €1,743 for the same tiny studio apartment? And mind you, the apartment didn't get better, there were no renovations done. In fact, they kind of got quite a bit worse. The windows started, not shutting fully anymore. There was a known leak on the roof which caused tiny amount of waterfall-esque flooding during heavy rain. So there was certainly nothing to increase the value of the apartment. But what caused the increase is the 4% rent increase. What that basically means is that within Ireland there are rent pressure zones. So all of Dublin is a rent pressure zone. And in the rent pressure zones, the landlords are allowed to do a rent increase every 12 months for up to 4%. Up to. It's not mandatory, they don't need to increase your rent at all. In fact, they could decrease it if they want to. But unfortunately, a lot of landlords take the 4% as the default. Also because a lot of the landlords are investment firms or real estate funds, all those kinds of places that like to maximize their returns. So when you move into a new flat, you often try to calculate how much it might be a few years down the line if you want to stay in the area, if you want to stay in that flat. Probably you can already see a lot of downsides for people renting when the rent is being increased by 4% every year. Not to mention that rents are really high to begin with. What happens eventually, just like it happened with us, is you more or less get priced out of your apartment, out of your area, because even if you're still able to afford maybe to keep up with the rent increases, at some point it just also doesn't make sense anymore to be paying that much for an apartment, like a studio, when in a different location in Dublin or maybe a little outside of Dublin, you could get an entire 1 or 2 bedroom apartment for that. And the really bad part about that is as well that neighborhoods can't really form, communities find it very hard to form if people constantly are being priced out of their areas. People keep on moving, and anyone who's ever moved knows it's, first of all, very stressful, and second of all, also usually quite expensive. If you need to organize movers to help you move, you probably have to buy a few new things. You don't know if you'll get your full deposit back from the old place you rented. You need to have the money up front for the first month's rent and new deposit for your new place. So some people might need to get a microloan. So all kinds of financial difficulties and challenges added to just trying to live somewhere. And of course, with rents increasing that quickly and salaries, let's be honest, probably not at the same rate, it also makes it that much harder for people to save up money. Now, I know what I just described all sounds very nightmarish and anxiety inducing, but I do have some good news for you today. So there's a new law now that actually completely changes the 4% rule. So instead of being able to increase the rent by 4% every year, or 8% as some landlords are trying to do since they weren't allowed to increase rents during the lockdowns, they won't be able to do that anymore. Instead, they'll only be able to increase the rent in line with inflation. And how they're going to measure that is with the Harmonized Index of Consumer Prices, which is a EU index where the EU basically looks at all the European countries, checks how much everyday goods cost, and then checks again the next month and the month after that. And through the progress of how, with tiny increases, those everyday items get more expensive, you try and measure inflation. And that the percentage increase, that is basically inflation measured by the HICP, whatever the official abbreviation of pronouncing this index is. As you might have noticed from news reports and whatnot, inflation usually isn't around 4%. If it was, you'd probably be hearing a lot more on the news. Generally, the European Central Bank tries to keep it under 2%. But of course, it's still an increase and rents are already really high to begin with, so it is a bit questionable to see how much it will do to the renting situation in general. Like, in theory, landlords can price down flats at any moment. There's nothing prohibiting them from lowering rents, except a lot of them probably actually won't. But I am hopeful that at least with the smaller rent increases, it'll make it much easier on people to stay longer in the neighborhood that they're living in, and it'll help that neighborhood create more of a sense of community and give people a bit more stability. So going forward, the RTB is where you'll be able to find a calculator to calculate a potential rent increase you might face. So let's say if you're looking at an apartment, you're trying to figure out how much it might be after a year, after 2 years. You can go there and figure it out, and in the future they'll also be responsible for trying to solve disputes if there are landlords claiming that they can charge you the 4% rent increase because they haven't heard of this new law. So that's where you can also go to get more information and get more support from professional housing, lawyer, accommodation experts, people who really know their stuff. So let us know in the comments what you think about this new law. Do you think it'll change anything? Do you think it'll make you stay longer in the flats that you're living in if you're living in a rent pressured zone? And let us know what other questions you might have about living in Ireland, specifically when it comes to accommodation. And don't forget to like, subscribe, ring the notification bell, and then I'll see you in the next video. Bye!